There are only 2 episodes of Cheers that I would be very happy to never watch again. The first one is the very last episode, which I will watch at some point again for the purpose of reviewing, and the other is Adieu, because it absolutely breaks me. I'm not saying it's not a good episode, but it is very challenging to watch. This is the 26th and final episode of the 5th season of Cheers. This is directed by James Burrows. I have no idea how I felt about this episode the first time that I watched this, but I feel like with watching the show again for the purpose of reviewing, I have developed an insane connection to Diane. I absolutely adore Shelley Long, and honestly, I have been dreading this episode. So before I go into any more information about this, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode. I will say 2 things. One, I do not think Shelley Long made the wrong decision to leave, because if she felt it was the right decision at that time in her life, then I think that that's absolutely fine. I completely respect her decision to leave the show. And the other thing is that this narrative doesn't really make a lot of sense. I get quite frustrated at the outcome of this episode, but they needed some reason to write Diane out of the show. So I completely understand why they made the decisions they did. But for example, let's say this was the very last episode of the show. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's exceptionally frustrating and kind of paints writers in a negative light and makes it seem like they can't do more than one thing at a time. So I don't actually love the narrative of this one, but then when we throw in the intense emotions that come with it, it's not a pleasant experience. However, there are some really brilliant moments, so it's a difficult episode to watch. And honestly, there was one point where I thought, okay, this is the extent of my emotions, this is how upset I'm going to get, this is how much I'm going to cry. And then in the penultimate scene, I just completely lost it. So I don't like this episode because of the emotions, but also it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But as I said, they needed to find some way to write Diane out, and short of killing her off, which I'm exceptionally glad they didn't do, I feel like this, I guess, makes enough sense. So I will now go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts along the way. It starts off with Carla asking Sam, why is he marrying Diane? And it's actually really sweet because she says that she married Nick because he made her feel squishy inside, which seems to be not really the case. She's saying this so Sam will say the same thing, and Carla decides to tell everybody at Cheers that Diane makes Sam feel squishy, and it just so happens that Diane is also at the bar and she comes through and says squishy, and it's adorable and a beautiful way to start things off, and funny because when Diane comes in and says squishy, Sam dives under his desk, which is a rather strange response, but one that I really enjoyed. Sumner then comes into Cheers, and I feel like as soon as we see Sumner, we know that this is not going to have a happy ending. Sumner is looking for Diane. Frasier introduces himself to Sumner, which is pretty great, and they go into the back room, Sumner and Diane, and he says to her that he thought he'd overestimated her once he found out about her engagement to Sam, so he started to look through everything she'd ever written. And I do have a question. Why does he have access to everything she's ever written? This was in the 80s. She's not got copies saved in the cloud that he can tap into, or she hasn't emailed him over attachments. I'm not entirely sure why he would have access to so many unfinished manuscripts. I don't know, maybe she started them in his presence, didn't like them, so left them behind. I don't know, but I feel like that was a little bit of a grey area in terms of the narrative making sense. And he actually sent an unfinished manuscript to a publisher, and I completely agree with Diane's response that she thought he didn't have any permission to do that. Speaking as a writer, I should point out Diane is probably the one character in any TV show or film or book that I relate to the most. So it doesn't help. It doesn't help with me feeling very frustrated by a lot of the decisions that were made in this episode. But Diane is very annoyed at Sumner for doing this, and I completely agree. If somebody sent one of my unfinished works to a publisher, I'd be mortified, because it's not the best that I can do, because obviously it's unfinished. And actually, things worked out well. I say that. Things did not go horribly because the publisher is actually taking an interest. What I love about this scene is Diane is fiddling with the pool balls, and there's clearly this nervousness and unease, partly probably because of seeing Sumner for the first time in a long time, but also because she's not sure. In my opinion, it's because she's not sure how she should be responding to this situation. And it's a small detail, but I really enjoyed it. And Sumner tells her she can just submit the full manuscript, which he assumes she has now finished. Again, why would she have finished it if he had the original? It's unlikely that if she wrote that when they were together, that she would have had various copies of an unfinished manuscript. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. But nevertheless, he assumes that she has now finished it, and she admits that she hasn't written anything in 5 years, and Sumner is very quick to point out that that's about the length of time she's been at Cheers. And Sumner tells her, and I quote, "It's imperative that you get out of here and finish this novel immediately." And Diane, I love her so much, replies, "A woman can be married and write too." And honestly, that statement, I 100% agree. I'm glad that the episode included that because it shows that actually that is the case, or can be the case. But that statement also kind of suggests that the rest of the episode just doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, I have issues with the narrative, but again, they needed a reason for Diane to leave, so I guess I can't think of a better reason for her to leave other than something horrendous happening, or Sam saying, "I don't love you, I don't want to marry you." So I guess this is the best option, I guess. Sam, we find out, was actually under the pool table and he heard this whole conversation. And indeed, he heard Diane saying that she's not going to leave to finish the novel. She's going to marry Sam. And then we cut to their new house, which I absolutely love. Kind of wish we got to spend a little bit more time there. And Diane is busy stuffing wedding invitations. Seems a little bit last minute because it is getting closer to their wedding date, but nevertheless, that's what she's doing. And Sam suggests postponing the wedding so that she can finish the book and that he can do something he always wanted to do. He said that because he wanted to make it seem like it would benefit both of them. But when Diane pushes him for information about what it is he's always wanted to do, he doesn't really know what to suggest. And Diane says, "Let's get married now, tonight." And Sam pointed out that Diane only wants to get married immediately because she's worried that she's going to change her mind. And I think that that's probably true. But to be honest, given how Sam and Diane's relationship went, I feel like they should have tied the knot the second they got engaged because, as Diane pointed out, something always seems to be going wrong. There always seems to be a problem on the horizon, and I feel like they should have just done it immediately. Diane then says that she'll let Sam think about whether they can get married tonight, and she'll go and make some tea. And then we cut to a flash forward scene, and I really want to praise the makeup for this. It's incredible. Sam's maybe not quite as good, but the makeup, the aging makeup looks amazing. And we see them however many years into the future talking about their life. Older Cliff then comes along delivering the mail still, and then Norm comes along to pick up Cliff, and I love that they're still best friends after all this time. And he gets a mini Norm and a mini Norman, and then they're discussing Woody, who apparently has a bar now, and then they're alone again, and Sam says, "It's been a good life. Do you have any regrets?" And this is the first of, I think, 3 times when my emotions started to escalate. This is the first time where it really affected me, when Diane says, "Sam Malone, I wouldn't trade 1 minute of my life with you for a Nobel Prize in literature." And even though it's a fictitious flash forward, I believe Diane meant that. I genuinely believe that. I don't think she was just saying this. And then we get a bit of comedy to lighten things. Carla phones to, again, ask Sam why he married Diane. We then cut to the present day, and Sam has said, okay. And Diane suggests they get married at Cheers. And then we immediately are in Cheers. Everybody is dressed in their best attire. Sam looks very dapper. And the music starts playing on the piano and Diane comes out. She looks absolutely gorgeous and Carla starts sobbing. And I have to say there are this is a very difficult scene to watch, very, very difficult, but there are two things that help to make it light. Carla's incredible sobbing, very loud sobbing, and constantly, maybe a bit too frequently to be honest, but it was a good distraction. Everybody in the bar is making bets on whether Sam and Diane will get married today or not, and because of the roller coaster that is this scene, they constantly keep exchanging money. So I feel like that was really essential for keeping things a little bit lighter, because it is, as I said, very difficult to watch. Unless, I guess, you're team Carla and you don't want them to get married, in which case it might not be that difficult. Sam says, I do. And Diane is just about to say, I do. And the phone rings. And Woody answers the phone and it's for Diane, but she tells him, I'm a bit busy at the moment. So Woody takes a message and all we hear is Woody saying, that's great, that's unbelievable. And Sam insists Woody tells them what it was about, and the publisher wants to publish the book and they want to give Diane a big advance to finish the manuscript. And Diane says, they carry on with the ceremony, and Diane says, I do. And it seems like that's it. They're married. They are married. There's just one thing that needs to be said, and that is it. Sam and Diane are married to be together forever. And we have the words, I now pronounce you man. And Sam says, I want to change my answer. And honestly, I hate it. I hate it so much. And this is kind of the second of 3 times when my emotions really escalated. And Sam starts to insult Diane. And he basically lists off all of the things she's bad at. And Shelley Long's face when Sam says, they're going to have to start inventing things for you to be bad at. And Diane says, make your point, Sam. And Shelley Long's face in that moment was just fabulous. And he explains she's good at writing and that he had his chance with baseball. This is her chance and she has to make her shot. And he asks her, do you agree we shouldn't get married? And she says, I do. And honestly, it infuriates me so much because not only, and again, I'm saying this with the understanding that they needed to write Shelley Long out. I get it. But it's so annoying that despite the fact that Diane had previously said a woman can be married and also write, she's now thinking, actually, that's not possible. Why? Why can't you get married and then while Sam is working at the bar, you stay in the house and write your book without that distraction? I don't understand, and I kind of find it insulting that they're suggesting that if Diane and Sam got married in that moment, Diane would be unable to write. And that's ludicrous. The reason she hasn't written in 5 years is because she's, yes, partly been distracted, but she's had no motivation. She's felt like there's no hope because she's not had any hope. Apart from that brief moment where she had one of her poems published, there hasn't been a lot to suggest that Diane is actually good at writing. But here she's given an advance. She has been given an advance to finish it. That is enough motivation that she would be able to finish the manuscript while being married to Sam. So it doesn't make sense, and it is so incredibly frustrating. And honestly, speaking as a writer, kind of insulting. And again, they needed a reason to write Diane out. I get it. But I feel like if they just thought a little bit harder, they could have come up with something that wasn't illogical and wasn't insulting to Diane's abilities and to the abilities of writers everywhere. And I feel like if this episode was written today, they wouldn't really get away with it. I feel like the backlash of them saying if Diane and Sam had married in that moment, Diane would be incapable of writing. I feel like the backlash would be severe. And it's heartbreaking, but it's really irritating as well. We then cut to just Sam and Diane. And I think that was the right decision to just have the two of them in the final scene. And Diane is still dressed for the wedding and is about to head out and go away for 6 months to write. And again, absolutely nonsense. But again, they could have been married and then she could have gone away to a retreat for 6 months. It's not impossible. And as she's heading out the door, And this is Sam. This is the bit that really, after this point, I just completely lost it. I fell apart. Sam says, "Have a good life." And of course, Diane turns around and says, "Why are you saying that?" And he explains, "You could die, or you could find somebody else. We could decide we want other things." And Diane says, "That's not going to happen." And she leaves. We see her legs walking up the stairs out of cheers. And Sam says to himself, "Have a good life." And then the final scene is just older Sam and Diane dancing together in their house. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Again, and I'll say this again, and I'll say this many times, I think Shelley Long made the right decision. If that was what was best for her and her career and her life, I know she wanted to spend more time with her family, her husband, her young daughter. I think she made the right decision. But it's still difficult. And if I never watch this episode again, I'm okay with that. Partly because I'm a mess, and I'm sure I will always be a mess when watching this, but also because it is very frustrating and kind of insulting. So, needless to say, Adieu is not an episode that I like. It's not an episode I ever want to watch again. It's not an episode I ever even want to think about again. But there are some good moments. I think they managed to inject enough comedy where relevant to keep things as light as possible. The other thing, I guess, is that we now get Giannelli, which I have to be happy about. I've loved her since I was 5 years old, so of course that is something that I'm so excited about, to rediscover Rebecca Howe and enjoy Giannelli for 6 seasons. It's bittersweet, mostly bitter, but a little bit bittersweet, and I will now move on from this and carry on watching the next 6 seasons of the show, and then I'm sure after that point I will circle back and begin again with the first episode where Sumner Sloan and Diane Chambers are meant to be getting married, and who could have predicted that 5 seasons later this is where we'd end up. I don't think I'd predicted this, and honestly, if I never think about Adieu again, I'll be pretty happy with that.